Hey car nerds, welcome back to Foaming Ions, where today we are going to foam some ions. As you may have seen in the rinseless wash video, there's some random water spots on that driver's side door panel. So I've got some Detail Co. Low pH or demineralization shampoo. I'm going to foam the car with that and let it dwell for a minute and see if we can get rid of those water spots. It's also been raining here in Arizona, so there's dirt and water spots all over the car. It's also a kind of an overcast day out, a little humid, so maybe we can do a little bit of a wash and talk though. Maybe you're new to EVs, or maybe you're considering an EV, so why don't we talk about it while we talk about it? You know what I mean? So, all right, enough of my rambling. Let's get into it. Let's get this thing going. All right, so to start this off, if you've been looking at or considering an EV, we should probably talk about something a little more grounded. So let's start with the wheels here. So if you're thinking about getting an EV, the biggest thing in EV ownership, the biggest place where people see savings is if they can charge at home. So something you have to ask yourself, can you charge at home? Do you have a house with a garage or a carport? Or even just like a townhouse? Somewhere that you could plug in a car. Whether you're, plugging in a level 1 charger that goes into a 120 volt outlet, or are you plugging into a 240 volt outlet? Level 1 charging will get you about 30 miles every 10 hours, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider your average drive to and from work, does that cover it, or does that cover most of it? That's something that you'll have to answer for yourself, but it is a pretty big factor. If you can't charge at home, can you charge somewhere convenient? A lot of workplaces are starting to offer charging in the workplace. And I mean, depending on where you work, there may be a lot of chargers in your work parking lot. Or maybe it's not even your business, maybe it's the property owner of that office park. Do they have level 2 chargers somewhere on premise? It's the convenience of charging is the biggest thing. Walmart is also building out a huge network of charging stations. They are opening up all over the place. They've got a ton in the Midwest and back east, but they've got permits filed in a lot of other states, and they're looking to move. They're looking to expand that to a lot of other states really quickly. So can you charge at a Walmart, like your local Walmart, or at a grocery store? Because that's the other thing. A lot of grocery stores now are contracting with various charge providers. And so there's charging infrastructure going in at a lot of different grocery stores. Sometimes it's through property management chains. Sometimes it is through the grocery store themselves. But a lot of places are looking at ways to make it more convenient to charge. All right, let's get this back wheel hosed off. So now even if you rent somewhere, would your landlord allow you to install a charger? Maybe you have a home that you rent or a townhouse. Have you had any discussions with your landlord or property management about installing a level 2 charger? And again, if a level 1 works for you, that's all you need. Sure, it sounds slow, but what is your average drive per day? How many times would you need to charge more than 30 miles overnight? And I say that overnight, but you can plug in every day. And that's the thing with EVs. You can plug in every day. It doesn't matter, you don't have to stop somewhere, if you charge at home anyways. You're not stopping anywhere. You're going home, and when you get home, it's going to take you all of 15 seconds to plug in. Maybe you don't keep the charge cable out and plugged in. Maybe you've got a level 1, you park in a carport or a driveway, and so you just plug inside of the house. Well, maybe it takes you a whole minute, to get the cord out and plug it in and get it connected to your car. But 1 minute's not bad. Especially if you can do that every day. Think about that. Like, you can have a full charge in your car ready to go every single day. Is that something you could do with a gas car? I guess. You could stop at a gas station every single day if you want to, but that sounds like a lot of work, a lot of stopping, a lot of time spent just to make sure that your gas car has full range every day. But that's kind of the thing with EV ownership, though. You miss out on that gas station stopping. I know it's not exactly the same, and if you had to stop and fast charge during the day, it would take more time. So don't get me wrong. There's that side of it too, but you have to be honest about the situation and what you're looking at. There are people that will buy electric cars, because they think they look great or offer the, no gas station benefits or whatever, but they don't consider the charging. And then they get, disappointed when they end up sitting at a fast charger once or twice a week for, 20 or 30 minutes. But again, that comes back to the charging convenience question. Can you charge somewhere convenient? Because if your grocery store or your Walmart has a charging station in a parking lot, how long is it going to take you to go get groceries? And if your car needs 30 or 40 minutes to charge up to 80 or 90%, so you have energy all week, can you do that while you go inside and get your groceries? My guess is you probably can. My guess is it's probably going to take you 30 or 40 minutes to get into a grocery store and get out with your groceries. So by that time, you're done. Your charging is done. So you maybe spent an extra minute or two in the parking lot, connecting the charge adapter and disconnecting it when you're done, but you charged up while you grocery shopped. And to me, that seems pretty convenient. All right, let's get this wheel washed or rinsed. So the other thing to go with the convenience is charging is power. What do you pay per month in power? Do you have any kind of use plans from your utility provider? There are also a lot of utility providers, at least in North America or the United States, that offer some type of rebates if you have an EV, or if you buy an EV, EVSE, which is basically fancy terms for a charger, like a level 2 home charger. You know, a lot of these power companies or utility companies, they offer you rebates on either the install of a level 2 charger or on the device itself. And you know, that can also make a big difference. You know, but you know, you at some point you're going to have to buy, you know, a device for home. You know, a lot of vehicles come with one, but you know, it's a power cord just like anything else. At some point in the next several years, it's probably going to go kaput. Just because that's how electronics are. I'm not trying to bash any brand or anything specific, but devices do fail. That's just the thing. That's how everybody makes money, I guess. All right, let's get this washed. You know, a lot of people, they seem to think that EVs have to be charged out in public, but you really don't have to. I forget the exact stat, but it's something like 90% or 95% of EV owners charge at home. So, I mean, you know, there are a lot of owners out there that, you know, again, live in apartments or townhomes, and you know, some of them do, you know, charge in public. There's some videos out there of a guy with a Mustang Mach-E with 300,000 miles on it in the last 3 years, and I think all of his charging has been public fast chargers. There's another video from a guy with a Hyundai Ioniq 5 that, you know, has put 100,000 miles on his car in the last 2 years, and he's only charged on level 2 a few times. You know, and you know, these batteries, they're lasting a lot longer than people anticipated. But what these guys found with all their public charging and their EVs is that the batteries don't degrade a whole lot. I guess I'm kind of getting off point a little bit, but when it comes to price, public charging is going to be the most expensive option. You know, you may pay 40, 50, 60 cents per kilowatt hour. You know, these charge providers want to make money, and you know, that pricing is how they've made money. Now, some providers do offer subscriptions. So you can get a subscription to like the Tesla supercharger network, for instance. It's like $10 per month, but the average price that you pay when you charge is 30 cents per kilowatt hour. So even if you're charging at home, if you've got a road trip to take, and you're mostly going to use, you know, Tesla superchargers, it's going to be worthwhile to get that subscription for that 1 month, because, you know, over, you know, 4 or 5 charging sessions, you're probably going to save money. You know, it might only be $5 or $10, but you may find that's worthwhile to you. Now, depending on your road trip, you know, maybe you've got more driving to do. I mean, you could save a lot more than that. Now, this also depends a lot on the pricing of those chargers. Every area is going to be different. A lot of charge providers have some type of, you know, like time of use pricing. So during the day, when, you know, power is more expensive, they may be charging more to charge on their charge network. At night, they may, you know, have that price. It may only be 15 or 20 cents if you go and charge between, like, I don't know, 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. You know, that doesn't exactly work for everybody. But I mean, it's a thing, you know, and Electrify America does it. I believe EVgo does it. They all have these different price windows based on, where the charger's at, how much the power costs for that charger, what time of day it is, if there's, if it's busy. Like Tesla charges you an extra fee if it's a busy station. If there's a lot of people on and out, you get surge pricing. But you can look up all of this through like PlugShare or a better route planner, or like the Tesla app, or even go to like Iona, EVgo, Electrify America, like their own sites, and they can show you pricing, and you can kind of price out how much it's going to take you to charge on your normal road trip compared to what you would spend in gas. But what you're probably going to find is that depending on gas prices, public charging may be similar in price to gas. It's usually lower than gas, but sometimes it's not a huge difference. But again, when you factor in that charging at home, where you might be paying 10, 15, 17, 20 or 25 cents per kilowatt hour, you could charge an Optiq for like $10, $12. And that's going to take you from like, 0% to 100%, $12, maybe even $14. Let's get crazy and say it costs 20. So it costs you 20 to go from 0 to 100% at home, which, that's unusual for a home charger, because again, you're plugging in more often. But if it takes $15 to get up to 300 miles of range out of your EV, like, that's not bad compared to gas, where you're probably going to spend like $60 or $70, especially today, to charge or to fill your gas tank. All right, so I will get on the Detail Co. demineralization shampoo here. We'll see if we can get rid of those water spots, and we'll get back to the EV talk. It is very important with low pH or acidic soap or alkaline soap to not let it dry. You want the car to dwell. You want this to dwell for a couple minutes so it can get in and break down the minerals. Or if you're using an alkaline soap, so it can break down some of that road grime or bug guts and stuff. But you want to watch it, and you want to make sure that it doesn't dry. It can change daily, weekly, monthly, annually. Overall, the price of gas just seems to go up over time. But, there are times where it does drop or it comes down. Now, when you think about the cost of charging an EV, though, if you're charging at home especially, your prices maybe change annually, biannually, semi-annually. They don't always change, and they don't change daily. Now, maybe you have a time of use plan, so maybe your rates change per season. Maybe your usage plan just changed by season anyways, whether or not you have time of use. So to go back to it, you're a utility company or power company, depending on your price plan, you may have rate changes, time of year. Sometimes during the summer, some of these utility companies also tack on an additional rate if you go over a certain amount of usage. So if you've got a house, maybe Maybe it's you, your spouse, or your partner, and maybe you have 8 kids. Maybe you're on the verge of hitting those higher cost caps during the summer, or higher usage rates during the summer. That's something you should look at your power bill, before you buy an EV, and you should take charging into account. Because otherwise, you're going to be upset when you get home, you charge your car 3 times in a month, and suddenly your power bill goes up, $150, because maybe you were expecting that to go up, $60 or $50. But with all your other usage, now you've got this extra surprise on your bill. But a little time and a little research can help you from running into those surprises. All right, I think it's time to get some carbon detail foam shampoo on this thing. All right, viewers, go ahead and keep an eye on the car while I get the foam can. But yeah, I think that about wraps up the pricing to charge an EV. You've got you've got to do a little research on your own, because every situation is going to be different. Every part of the country is going to be different. Every part of the world is going to be a little bit different. And so you just need to take a little time and look at some of that before you commit to buying an EV. Now, I would make the argument that an EV would probably work for 90% of the people, maybe even 95% of the people, for their daily usage. Again, there may be some people that drive 200 miles a day or 300 miles a day for work. And, maybe that's you. And that's cool if you like that, but you have to understand that you are not the average driver. You are far and away an above average driver. The average commute per day is only like 25 or 30 miles. So you may be saying at this point, Jerry, that's great. Pricing's not so bad to charge. But what about the cost of an EV? Those things can cost $50,000 or $60,000. Well, there are options that cost less. Not going to beat around the bush there. There are a lot of EVs that cost around $40,000 or $50,000. But put that into perspective, the average car these days costs $50,000 or $60,000. I think the average car price is $50,000, which seems really expensive, and as far as I'm concerned, that is expensive. But that's the problem with inflation. Several years ago, there was a lot of shortages in products, and cars had supply issues, and that caused the price of cars to go up. And just like anything else that ever has a price increase, that's not from, just the cost of manufacturing or normal everyday business costs. If it's a tariff or supply shortage that drives them up, those prices just stay high. They never really come back down. You may occasionally see a small price drop, but it's not the norm. When a price goes up, it stays up. And that's just the way businesses work. They got that extra money out of us, when their supplies were low. And, maybe they didn't have as much margin on it then. But now some of those prices to them have dropped. But people are still buying at those higher prices. So why would you drop your price if people are buying at the current price? Now, of course, that gives them some more leeway with, financing options or, big sales events. Maybe they can, advertise, that they're taking some money off. A lot of them will do things like that, especially around big holidays. But for the most part, the price of vehicles is high. And it doesn't matter if it's an EV or not. Now, the other thing is with costs of an EV, a lot of people talk about the depreciation of an EV. I would tend to blame some of those original Leafs and Bolts because they didn't have, very good power management issues. Or they didn't have very good thermal management for their batteries. Let's put it that way. A lot of those early EV batteries didn't have a very long lifespan. And I think that's sort of created a stereotype with EVs. Let's move around to the other side of the car. You got to remember, I live in Arizona, and whether or not the sun is out, it's still hot. And you do not want to allow soap to dry in your car, because then, you just get water spots or other issues. And considering I'm trying to remove water spots, let's not put any more on the car. All right, let me move you guys around. So I kind of blame some of those original EVs with the bad thermal management for creating that stereotype about the EV batteries not lasting. The manufacturers have to offer at least an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty on batteries. So, that's for a good chunk of people, that's probably a 6 to 10 year warranty. Sure, it only lasts 8 years, but, that also means that these companies, these auto manufacturers, they're going to be designing these batteries with that in mind. They're not going to design a battery that's going to fail or that could fail. The last thing they want to do is replace, 100,000 batteries, every 4 years. That's not going to fit into their profit margins very well. This has also led manufacturers to implement a buffer in the battery. Now, I mean, some manufacturers did this to begin with, or even in the beginning, because they wanted to be sure that that those batteries had ample power. They also wanted to take some precautions. Maybe somebody is out and wasn't paying attention, and they've run their battery down to zero. That buffer might be good for an extra 10 miles to get them to a charge station. Now, in today's age, I think there are charge stations probably every 10 miles. Back in the day, that might not have been the case, but that's where we sit today. All right, let me get this side rinsed off. The other side wet again. Yeah, with the depreciation, if you're concerned about it, you can always look into leasing. Another great thing is you can buy a used. There are a lot of used options out there, and used options don't have that initial depreciation hit of gently used, and I do mean gently used EVs, in that $20,000 to $30,000 range. They may be coming off lease and have 20,000, 30,000 miles. But if you look and take your time in looking, you can find some of these EVs coming off a 1 or 2 year lease that only have 10,000 miles. Well, somebody just paid a lease and they took that initial depreciation hit. And now you're getting a good chunk of money off of the price of that EV. Especially with today's car prices, not everyone can afford to buy a new car anymore. But used is a great option for people. I'm going to be using a Technician's Choice Tech 582 as a drying aid here. And let's see if we can get this thing dry. I guess let's see if we can get it dry before the heat dries it. Just want to go through, get a few mists on each panel, and then let's get this dry. So yeah, to go back to it, there are a lot of great options in used, especially if you're able to wait. If you watch that used market, you can find a lot of really good deals on it. There's a lot of people in the last couple of years that leased EVs. Some states even offered their own rebates. Like Colorado. There were people in Colorado that were leasing EVs for maybe like $150 a month. It's crazy. But if you were looking at or considering getting into an EV, $150 a month for a lease, man, let me tell you, that's cheap. That is a very low cost of entry. Now, I mean, obviously, you're not going to buy out your lease for $150 a month at the end of it, but man, if you could get a 2-year lease for that price, whew, that's a smoking deal. But I digress. There's other states that offered various rebates. If you happen to live in California now, they just passed a new rule or a new law that is going to give people up to a $3,500 rebate on new EVs that cost less than $50,000 or $50,000 or less. Now, if the company happens to be headquartered in California, such as Lucid or Rivian, there is no cost cap. If you buy a $60,000 Rivian R2 while you're in the state of California with this rule, guess who gets $3,500 off? Now, Lucid's an expensive brand. And if $3,500 makes or breaks a deal on a $120,000 car, I think you might just be looking in the wrong price bracket. I don't know that you need $3,500 off of a $120,000 car. But I mean, that's not to say that people that, have that kind of money to spend don't also deserve to get some kind of discount or rebate. So, I mean, I do understand it from that side of things. But as with anything, you need to buy within your price bracket or your bracket of affordability. Just because you can afford, a lease payment on a $120,000 car, for instance, can you afford the insurance on a $120,000 car? Some of those fancy cars, like you start looking at a Porsche Taycan, and I think even the Lucid Air Sapphire, those things have carbon ceramic brakes. Those are going to cost more than your traditional brake pads. So again, to kind of put it in perspective, can you afford that insurance price? Maybe you can afford the lease payment, but can you afford the insurance on it? And again, that's something you have to consider. Although I would argue that you have to consider that no matter what car you buy, whether it's an EV or not. But we're talking about the EVs here, so I guess we'll kind of keep it on point. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of options out there for used EVs. There are car channels out there that have a bunch of used car breakdowns or used EV breakdowns. There's a great podcast called the Batteries Included podcast that's all about EVs and EV news. And they have started a weekly series on that podcast channel where they just talk about used EVs and what used EVs somebody could buy or should buy in a certain price range or a certain area of the country or even the world. there's lots of options out there. In North America, we got a weird market right now when it comes to EVs. But even then, we have over 40 options to choose from for an EV. There's a there's a growing number, and I find it kind of funny to say that because, GM has talked about delaying the refresh of their Silverado and Sierra EVs. Ford canceled their Lightning pickup truck. Honda just completely pulled out of the EV market altogether. But Toyota hasn't taken EVs very seriously for the last 10 years. And suddenly, they've got a ton of vehicles coming to market. All right, I'm going to move you guys a little bit to the other side. All right, let's continue with this drying thing. But there are, going back to it, there's a lot of great used EVs out there. That Batteries Included podcast is actually really fun to watch and listen to. They've got a lot of industry experts on it, and some of these guys on there, they've been driving and working with EVs for a very long time. The one host, Tom Malogny's got his own channel called State of Charge. He's also got a website, EVChargingStations.com. But he has a ton of information out there on EVs and EV charging and charger reviews and adapter reviews. Man is a wealth of knowledge. But if you're looking at an EV, a used option is a great price, or a great price point to be looking at. And then you don't have to worry about any depreciation. And then the other thing to think about too, when you're thinking about an EV, is maintenance. Originally there were not a lot of tires that were made for EVs. The other thing is there were not, when EVs came out, there also were not a lot of really hard tires. But now to hit, fuel efficiency ratings and metrics, there are harder tires. Those harder tires help give you more range or more mileage in a gas car. So EV tires now, they can last you, 20, 30,000 miles. And that's pretty comparable to a gas car. The EVs have instant torque. You're not waiting on an engine to build up power. Whether it takes a couple seconds or several seconds. You're in a gas car. You're waiting for the engine and I guess the combination of the engine and transmission to hit the power curve. And then that's where you're going to get your acceleration and like quarter mile times. In an EV, that's all like instantaneous. The motor is on or off, and it just depends how much power is going to that motor. And so there are a lot of EVs that have like a sub 6 second 0 to 60 time, which also gives a lot of EVs a very sporty feeling. Whether or not the manufacturer was looking to make a sports vehicle. It can definitely feel sporty with that quick acceleration. I mean, the thing is, a lot of manufacturers have to change those power curves to kind of hit their target audience. To go back to Toyota has released a bunch of new EVs. And I say Toyota, but I mean really it's Toyota and Subaru. They, Toyota owns a good chunk of Subaru, but they went in together on the EV market. So I mean, if you're looking at like a Toyota BZ, you can also look at like a Subaru Solterra, because they're the same car. They may look a little bit different. They may be tuned a little bit different, but 99% of that car is the same. Maybe 99% is a little exaggeration, but it is the same platform, the same technology, same motors. All they do is tune it a little differently. It's like if you're looking at a Toyota RAV4, for instance, you could look at a Subaru Solterra or a Toyota BZ, because they are both similar in size to the RAV4. But now if you look at like a BZ Woodland or a Subaru Trail Seeker, the Trail Seeker is slightly bigger than a RAV4, slightly bigger than a BZ, has slightly more power, has slightly more of everything, really, except for price. You can get a Trail Seeker that's loaded out for less than you can get a loaded out Toyota BZ. So you have to ask yourself, do you mind driving a Subaru over a Toyota? Because that's kind of a good price. You get a slightly bigger car for the money. And again, that technology that's inside of it's all the same. All right, let's work on these windows. The Toyota and Subaru, for the last few years, I don't know that they really took the EV market seriously. They're still lacking EV route planning. So I guess if you're looking to buy a Toyota, that's something to consider. If you're going on a road trip, you're going to want to use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and you're going to want to use the EV route planning that's built into those applications. Now, this might also mean you have to go in there and figure out the options on how to enable that, but that's something you're going to want to do. Because last thing you want to do is run out of charge in the middle of a highway in the middle of summer. Because then you're stuck at the side of the road for a couple hours sweating your back end off. And, that's not going to be a fun experience. I mean, that's not a fun experience no matter what you drive. But hopefully, Toyota will add that in the near future. They say it's coming, but they've been saying that for several months. But hopefully that wait is almost over. But, there's a kind of went off on a tangent there. But when it comes back to maintenance, there's not a lot for maintenance. Again, when you're looking at the total cost of EV ownership, you don't have regular oil changes. Now, it is very surprising to some, and I also say this about the EV community in general, but almost every EV has a manufacturer recommended oil change time. Now, this isn't regular motor oil. It's not like you're going to go to a Jiffy Lube and get it done. I mean, maybe in the future you can, but what it is, it's the gear oil in the electric motor. These motors have like a single reduction gear. So they don't have transmissions. It's just more or less a direct drive motor unit. There's the stator that turns the rotor, and the rotor hits that reduction gear, and that reduction gear turns the wheels. Maybe I've got that out of order. I'm not an EV surgeon. I'm just an enthusiast, and I can be wrong. That's human nature. Nobody's perfect all the time. But anyways, the that gear oil needs to be changed at some point. Just like it would need to be done in automatic transmission or a manual transmission. Um, it's not a huge deal, and it's not often. Depending on the manufacturer, I believe GM says under heavy driving, it's 75,000 miles. So how long is it going to take you to drive 75,000 miles? Are you going to drive 75,000 miles in a year? I mean, maybe somebody will. But, that's, again, going to be an above average use case. If you're driving that many miles in a year, you're not the average driver. Maybe it's average for your industry, but you're not average overall. All right, let's get some of these drips off of here. But, 75,000 miles, that's a lot of mileage. And I know I talked earlier, too, about 100,000 miles, because there are people that drive it. There are people that work on the road. There are several industries where people are like that. And they're not all truckers. They're not all hauling cargo across the country. But you've got the one oil change. There's been one person online with an Optiq that has driven 80,000 miles in the last year. Because you have to remember, these cars came out early in 2025, so it's taken them about a year and a half to get to 100,000 miles. And he had the oil change done a couple months ago, and he said it was about $475 at the dealer. I would think that would be something covered under warranty, because he's under that 100,000 miles. But maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe the bumper to bumper warranty also isn't 100,000 miles. Maybe it's 60,000. Because I know it's only a 4-year warranty. But that's not bad. I mean, if you've got the car for 6 or 7 years and you have to do one oil change at $400 or $475, that's really not too bad. I mean, you're gonna spend at least $100 a year on oil changes. That's assuming you get one oil change a year because you don't drive a lot. If you drive more than that, you can figure $200 or $300 a year. But it's just something to think about. Something to kind of put in your research notes, and whether or not you're going to buy an EV. All right, so we've talked about the gear oil. We've talked about the tires. The other thing is, what are you going to do for maintenance? Windshield washer fluid, wiper blades. That's it. I mean, that's really it. That's your regular maintenance. And, windshield washer fluid, that's going to vary based on, where you live. All right, so let's work on some tire shine. And it's not just tire shine, but wheels in general. Let's get the handy dandy stool out. Get some towels in there, the applicator. Let's get my tire stuff. And I've really been a fan of the Carbon Detail Supply tire dressing. I mean, I've been a fan of the Carbon Detail Supply stuff in general, but let me tell you, the tire dressing, it's great. I love the matte finish. Let's get these wheels dry. So, going back to cost of maintenance in an EV, there isn't a lot of ongoing cost. Again, it's going to vary by EV. Some EVs have one pedal driving, like a Tesla or a GM. Ford, they all have one pedal. And what is one pedal? One pedal is, simply put, it's exactly that. It's using one pedal to drive. You just use the gas pedal. And the way it works is the more you let off the gas, it applies some regenerative braking through the motor. As in the motor is spinning, and some of that resistance is then generating power, which feeds right back into the battery. Now, some manufacturers, rely on that to hit their mileage range or their efficiency goals. Not all of them do, but some do take that into account. There are other manufacturers that, like Porsche, for instance, they don't like regen braking. I believe they offer it on their EVs, or at least some of their EVs, but they don't offer it on all of them. But they would prefer people to coast for longer, in their EV when they go to stop. Now, my argument, and others out there have a similar argument and sentiment. If you use one pedal enough and you get used to it, you can basically coast the car with one pedal. You just have to lightly lift off the gas pedal. It's the more you lift off, the more regen you get out of the brakes or out of the motors. So if you lift off a lot, you're going to get some harder braking. And now all the auto manufacturers, they use blended braking. Sorry, forgetting my words here, but they use blended braking, so it's not just all on the motor or just all on the brake pads. As the car stops or slows or is needed, like maybe you're mashing the brakes to avoid an accident. Well, at that point, the car's not going to just rely on the motor and the regen braking to stop. It's going to apply the physical brakes or mechanical brakes. But because of this, and because of the way that works, brake pads on most EVs last a very long time. If you look online, there's people that, say they're making it 50,000 miles, some at 80,000, 100,000 miles. Now there's such a thing as being too light on the regen braking, because maybe they rely on regen, you know, so much, or they're so good at regen braking or whatever that the car never has to really apply the mechanical brakes. And so sometimes you'll read about people like I've seen it in the Mustang Mach-E forums. There's people that use the regen braking so well in that, and they never really use mechanical brakes at any kind of speed. And so what happens is their rotors start to rust. Well, when those rotors rust, they can also warp. They can get a little bent out of shape. I would be too if I was put on a car and I never got used. I mean, you got to use those things once in a while. So, I mean, as an EV owner, I guess a maintenance item is to, make sure you hit the brakes a little harder once in a while. Just to make sure you're not building up any rust on those rotors. But I mean, overall, EV owners are getting a lot of brake life out of their brakes. So again, something to think about. How much are you spending to replace your brake pads in your gas car? Is that something that you're doing every few years? Maybe you drive a lot. What mileage are you getting that done? If you were to switch to an EV, would that still be a problem? Would you be able to save a little bit of money on brake pads? There's a lot that goes into thinking about buying an EV, but cost of maintenance is obviously something you need to think about with any car, because even if you were to go and say like buy a Porsche 911, again, maybe you've thought about the price of the car. It's like, oh, I can afford that, just barely afford that. And then you throw on the insurance, and you weren't really thinking about the insurance. It's like, man, now I gotta find something to sell online for $50 a month to make sure my bank account doesn't go negative, or maybe I can't go out and eat out anymore. But now you're also going to have to look at replacing carbon ceramic brakes every couple of years at a Porsche dealership, or getting the maintenance done at a Porsche dealership. I don't know if you've seen anything about the maintenance on new Porsches, but like those new 911s, it's crazy. To replace the air filter, you got to remove like so much off the back of the car. It's crazy. All right, let me move to the other side, and we'll continue this discussion. All right. So now for the other side of the car. Let's get my chemicals. Sometimes trying to have a bougie garage doesn't work, because sometimes these wheels don't want to go over the rugs or the runners that I have in the garage. But yeah, so cost of ownership, and maintenance. I would love to have a Porsche 911 GT3, but man, I am so far away from affording the car, the insurance, and the maintenance on that thing. I don't even want to know how much it costs to get an oil change done, because I guarantee you're not going to go into a Jiffy Lube or one of those 5-minute oil places, or like a Mobile One or whatever, or a Valvoline oil stop. I mean, there's no way you're going to go into one of those places and get a quality oil change in a Porsche 911. I mean, they might do it. They might have people that can do it, but they might not be certified to do it. And then you're looking at potential warranty issues if something goes wrong. And I don't know, having a $200,000 or $300,000 car that suddenly has no warranty and needs $100,000 of work, whew, That just hurts my heart, especially because it's a Porsche. But I digress. But, again, there's just, things you have to consider, with buying any vehicle. But to go back to my argument earlier, and the EVs would probably work for 90, maybe 95% of the people in the world, I think it's going to save those people money too. Now, you may still have concerns about road tripping. Maybe you like to take a road trip, a few times a year, and you're not just going, somewhere in the state. Maybe you're driving for a couple days, and so maybe you're going to have a dozen charge stops or something on your route. That's again that's something I guess you have to consider. But you can use a website like a Better Route Planner, and you can map out what those road trips would look like. They have a comparison tool now where you can go in and you can see, you can add 3 different cars you're looking at. Maybe you're looking at a 2026 Toyota BZ, maybe you're looking at a 2026 Cadillac Optiq, and maybe you're looking at the brand new BMW iX3. Well, you can go on a Better Route Planner, you can hit that comparison tool. You can plug in your starting point, your destination on the longest road trip you take every year, and it'll bring you up a comparison, and it's going to show you how many charge stops that vehicle needs, how long you're going to spend charging, how much you spend driving, and it's going to give you a really good idea. Now, generally speaking, though, if you have an EV that gets 300 miles of range, like the Optiq, the Optiq here gets 300 miles of range. It's got an 85 kilowatt hour battery pack that's usable. It's closer to 90 kilowatt hours, when you include that buffer. To go back to it, road trip charging. if you're getting 300 miles, say that's the EPA rated range in an EV, you're going to be able to drive for a couple hours down a highway. Now, in a gas car, because of the transmission, you tend to get better mileage at highway speeds, because it hits that bigger gear. The engine's turning less, it's using less fuel to produce the power to propel you down the road. Now, when you think about it, when you need to go faster on the highway, maybe you're going to pass somebody. When you hit the gas to get around them, you kind of feel that surge in power because, the transmission shifting to a lower gear, the RPM spike up, and, that's what gets you moving because the car's putting you into that power band to give you the power you need. But, again, an EV, they don't have that transmission. You don't have gears to change. You have a single reduction gear. So this means that highway speeds, between that and, the airflow, air creates more resistance the faster you go. So now you're kind of hitting both things. So, you're not going to hit, at least in most EVs, again, it varies by brand and the way they've set things up. But you're not going to typically hit that EPA range at highway speeds. Again, going back to Tom Malogney with the State of Charge and EVChargingStations.com, he does a lot of 70 mile an hour range tests. He lives back east where he's at. That's the highway speed limit. There are a lot of highways across North America, where the speed limit is about 70 miles an hour. But you're typically not going to get your EPA range at 70 or 75 miles an hour. But you are going to be able to drive for a couple hours. You're going to get a couple hundred miles out of that, maybe 250. Again, kind of depends on the car. But something to think about, you know, how long does your bladder last? Are you one of these people that you dehydrate yourself so you can make a 6-hour drive straight through without stopping? Or, you just want to stop at a gas station for 2 minutes and get half a tank of gas so you can, get off to your destination? And then you show up at your destination. Now you're hangry because you're hungry. You haven't eaten in several hours. You haven't drank anything all day. And you've had the stress of driving for several hours. So I mean, what's your what's your state of mind at that point? I mean, I'm not saying that EVs charging on a stop is quick, because it can take 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe even 40 minutes. The way to think about it, like when you stop in a gas car, you are stopping to refuel. You're going to fill that tank up, because chances are, if you get 200 or 300 miles of range out of your car, 600 miles is going to get you to your destination, or a lot closer to your destination. You're gonna stop every 3 or 4 hours and refill your tank and keep going. Well, in an EV, there's a charging curve for those batteries. They don't, like the Optiq has a 150 kilowatt charge speed at optimum speed. But you're not going to get 150 kilowatts from 0 to 100%. Even cell phones do this. As the battery gets more full, charging slows down. Think of it like filling a movie theater. When you buy tickets to a movie premiere that's got a full theater, you go into that movie theater, when it's empty, and you can go right to your seat. You can select whatever seat you want. It's super easy. But think about the people that come in, like at the end of that last preview. They're standing at the side like, crap, where do we sit? Are we stuck in the front rows? Maybe they walk up and down the aisle a little bit to see if there's a room. Like they might see a couple empty seats, and they're asking, hey, are those seats taken? And then they're going up and down, and they finally end up in the front row of the movie theater. But that's kind of like battery charging. You can charge really fast when the battery is empty, but as it gets full, those electrons have to have places to go. So the battery charging slows down. So when you're fast charging, especially like fast charging on a road trip, you're not charging to hit 100% or 80%. You're charging to hit the next charge stop within that optimum charge band or charge curve. Because it might take you 40 minutes to charge from say 10 to 80%. And if you do that, you might get frustrated because now you're stopping for 40 minutes every time. But if you look at the navigation in a car or a better route planner or even PlugShare, if you go to their website, you can do EVRouteplanning through there. But if you look at those sites, they may be telling you to charge from 15 or 20%, up to 50 or 60%. So again, maybe you need 15 or 20 minutes to stop. And then you go from there, you go on to that next charge stop, and you do it again for another 10, 15, 20 minutes. Well, now you've gone and you've driven 4 hours, you've gone 400 or 500 miles, and you've only stopped to charge for maybe 40 minutes in total. Whereas before, if you sat and you waited from 10 all the way up to 40 or 80%, you were sitting for 40 minutes. So if you plan accordingly and you kind of follow that advice, charging on a route's not so bad. It is something you have to get used to. It is something a little bit different because in your head you're so used to buying gas. We've been buying gas for 20, 30, 40, 50, 80 years, depending how old you are. And EVs are relatively new, at least in the mass market consumer space. People have made EVs for as long as there's been automobiles. Whether or not they've had range to really go anywhere or do anything has been another story. But if if you're staying hydrated and you're eating, like normal while you're out on these road trips, you're probably going to need to stop every couple hours and use the restroom and, get another drink or maybe some snacks or whatever. And so many of these charging stations are popping up with gas stations. Especially these truck stops now. These truck stops are adding, whether they're doing it on their own or they're working with like GM or EVgo or Mercedes or Tesla or Iona. All these places are adding charge stops. So there's a lot of options out there where you're going to have, like bathrooms and the ability to get snacks. So, all right, let me grab a towel, get some of these water drips, and we'll wrap this up. All right, so as we wrap up here, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the Detail Co. Demineralization or low pH soap, because as you may be able to see here, those water spots are gone. Yep, there's still some micro marring that you can see with the light, but I mean the Tech 582 gives a nice finish. It's a nice mirror finish, and you can't even see that micro marring here without the light. At some point here, yeah, I am gonna do a paint correction, and I'll buff these out or whatever. But yeah, let me give you a quick run around the car for some extra B-roll, and then we'll wrap up. So let's get this wrapped up. And real quick, just as a reminder, it is summer in the northern hemisphere. And even when it's summer down in the southern hemisphere, make sure you've got a cooling towel or a fan. Make sure to drink plenty of water. Stay hydrated. Whether you do this professionally or as a hobbyist and enthusiast, stay hydrated. Take care of yourself. Because what good is a beautiful car if you're laying on the ground over there suffering from heat exhaustion? Let's not go there. Take care of yourself. So, all right. So to wrap this up, though, I mean, there is a lot to consider if you're looking at getting an EV. And I'm not crazy. I know EVs aren't for everybody. Some people have a very on-the-go lifestyle, and maybe they don't have somewhere to charge at home. So it's not going to work for them. At least right now, it's not going to work. EV technology has come a long way, and I do in a very long way in the last 10 years. I mean, there's been more innovations in EVs in the last 10 years than there has been gas engines in the last 20 or 30. It's crazy. And I mean, you can even look at the hybrids now. You've got like a turbo 4-cylinder that produces 200 horsepower. But now you've got an electric motor on there that also does 200 horsepower. Anyways, I digress. Hybrids are a whole different topic of discussion. But, just looking at a BEV or a battery electric vehicle, just a pure EV, there's a lot of things to consider. You should consider, the road trip charging, the daily charging, maintenance and your fuel cost and all that. There's a lot to consider. There's a lot that goes into this. So I'm not crazy. I know it's not going to work for everybody, and not everybody wants to go to an EV right now. Also, understandable. I get it. And I also understand there's people with range anxiety. And my big thing there is I would recommend that you borrow somebody's EV or go with somebody on an EV road trip just so that you can experience it. Because I think getting out and experiencing that and seeing, how easy it is to actually charge in public, that goes a long way to curing that range anxiety. So with that said, though, I mean, if you have questions, feel free, leave a comment, ask some questions. Go check out some of the other channels like Out of Spec, State of Charge, Batteries Included, EV Geek Studios. I mean, just name a few. I mean, there's a bunch of people out there. Inside EVs also does a podcast. They've got a website, whole thing. I mean, they're also a great resource for information and news. Miss Go Electric, again, she does like a weekly news episode that's really informative. But go check these people out. If you've got questions, leave them below. I'll do what I can to answer them or point you in the right direction. But it's I wouldn't say it's a lifestyle change, but there's certain things in your life that definitely change when you get an EV. And for the last 9 months that I've had the Optiq, and especially since I got my level 2 charger installed on the wall there, let me tell you, it is amazing. I can come home, I can go out all day, run errands, go out, whatever, date night. I can come home, I can plug that thing in and just let it do its thing all night. Or I can plug it in the morning and, when I go to leave a few hours later, hey, guess what? I've got an extra 90 miles of charge. I don't drive a ton on a daily basis, so I tend to leave it charged at about 65, 70%, depending on what I'm doing that week. That might be different for everybody. I'm just thinking about like battery health and longevity of the battery. If I can keep it closer to the middle, then, maybe it'll last longer. That's general guidance right now. Batteries are lasting longer than ever. There was a study, I believe from Recurrent, that had a couple thousand or several thousand vehicles. And they found that, EVs that have been produced in the last several years, or I guess out of like the last 4 years, only 0.3% or 0.03% have needed a battery replacement. I mean, that's huge. And even then, going up, it's below 5% for the last several years. That's a lot of EVs on the road that don't need a battery change. And I think they're looking at below 80% battery capacity. And I know like a 20%, hit on your range, overall is, that might be noticeable depending on the EV you have. If you've got like an older Chevy Bolt that gets 200 miles or 250 miles or whatever it was of range, you might suddenly notice a 20% drop. Again, it's going to vary, but again, I'm kind of going off on some tangents here, but it's wonderful though to just come home, take 15 seconds, plug it in, go in the house and forget about it. And then I can come out the next day or two, unplug it and go do whatever it is I need to do. It's nice. I don't have to go to the gas station. Last time I went to a gas station, I bought Powerball tickets. I mean, how often do you go, And it's something you don't think about it until you actually do it and you actually live it and see it. It's a change. But again, if you got questions, go ahead and ask them below. And if you've made it this far, go ahead, like and subscribe and come back for more. And we'll do some more fun stuff with EVs and car detailing. All right, catch you guys in the next one.